I'm Tom Davies, and this is Collecting Stories, American Art. Urban life and the images of urban living attracted many artists who were previously painters of rural landscape scenes. Certainly, this winter scene by Guy Wiggins, entitled Out My Studio Window 1926, applies. Wiggins was an old-line landscape artist before urban scenes dominated his work. Our next segment looks at the work of a dozen painters of the urban landscape. The growth of urban centers, especially New York City, changed the condition and way the inhabitants lived. They also provided the artist with a dramatically different subject to paint. Viewing urban life from afar is this crisply painted winter scene from the New Jersey side of the Hudson and the Manhattan off in the distance. The artist is William Starkweather, who immigrated from Scotland and distinguished himself as one of the few students of the great Joaquin Sorolla, often referred to as the Spanish Sergeant, for 3 years in Sevilla. His connection with Sorolla continued when the Spanish master visited America in 1909 for an exhibition at the Hispanic Society. Starkweather became the Society's assistant curator. Starkweather also studied with John Henry Twachtman and was a neighbor and painting companion of Edward Hopper in Washington Square Park. Starkweather remained a New York City resident and instructor in several institutions in the city. He painted many urban scenes like this haunting self-portrait, richly painted with a complex view of urban living in the background. This is another urban image by the artist from an unidentified location. The final urban sketch captures the gritty side of the city with the base of the Brooklyn Bridge as the iconic background. In the mid to late 1890s, Impressionism became mainstream. Many of the Impressionist artists lived, had studios and clients in the city, especially New York. These artists tended to view the city purely as an urban landscape, capturing scenes of buildings, streets, bridges, waterfront rail yards, and commercial activities in the surrounding waterways. This view of urban scenes differs from the artists we've referred to as the Ashcan School, whose focus was more directed at the people and the plight of city dwellers. There's probably no single image that captures rampant industrialism better than the steel mills of Pittsburgh. Lithuanian-born Aaron Gorson spent over 20 years in Steeltown and became known as a pioneer industrial landscapist. This scene is the junction of the Monongahela and Allegheny rivers and the open hearth furnaces belching fire and smoke. Gorson was called a true urban poet of the paintbrush, in love with the nighttime beauty of industrial Pittsburgh. He saw the glowing effects of light and smoke as moving visual poetry and monumental artistic beauty. Gorson was highly successful and sought after in his lifetime. Of course, wearing today's environmental hat, we would see pollution rather than industrial beauty. The artist here is Max Kuehne, born in Germany in 1880, immigrated to the U.S. in his teens, and settled in New York early enough to actually sail and swim in the Hudson River with minimal chance of disease. He became closely associated with the Ashcan artists, George Bellows, Edward Hopper, and others in New York. Earlier, we looked at a sweeping view of Gloucester Harbor and Rocky Neck by the artist. This is a distinctive panoramic view of Lower Manhattan seen from the New Jersey side, painted in 1913. Kuehne divided his time between New York and Cape Ann, eventually settling permanently in Rockport in 1918. I had the good fortune to meet him on a number of occasions shortly before his passing. I enjoyed his colorful tales of his early New York days, but I had no idea how good his work was until a major retrospective was held in New York about 4 years after his passing. It was an eye-opener. This painting proved to be a lesson in occasionally keeping one's mouth shut. Now, let's fast forward. I was driving to the Peabody Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, and the Marine Arts Gallery nearby the museum. Upon entering the gallery, I saw a bunch of stuff from a North Shore estate being offloaded from a truck and leaned against a wall. I was with a friend, and as we knelt down to examine this large New York City painting in winter, surprised, I recognized the signature, and I whispered it to my friend. That's a Max Kuehne, obviously benefiting from just having seen the artist's retrospective in New York. The dealer, whom I was not that fond of anyway, came over. Somehow I resisted the urge to mouth off and use the artist's name, and instead casually asked who the artist was. A long pause ensued. I could see the dealer formulate his answer, and with great insight he said, "This is a famous Polish artist, Max Kuehne, who came to America briefly to paint a brilliant series of New York scenes." Wow! How much does a Polish painting of New York City cost? A short pause. $750. That's nice. I paid him and we departed. Quickly, proving the value of keeping your mouth shut. One of the most iconic images in New York's waterways is the Brooklyn Bridge, spanning the East River and viewed from the Brooklyn side looking towards Manhattan. With a studio in the city, a young Joseph Margulies was painting during the time of the Ashcan artists and absorbing some of their views of city life and the gritty way to portray it. Margulies' career encompassed extensive portrait commissions, and the list of famous figures, magazine covers, awards, and museum representations is staggering. He was equally skilled in watercolor, etching, and aquatints. Towards the latter part of his career, Joseph Margulies settled in Gloucester, producing many sparkling harbor scenes in rich, Fauvist colors. The second of New York's iconic bridges has 3 names, at least: the 59th, the Queensboro, and the Koch. Take your pick. The Australian Hayley Lever came to America in 1911, already a well-recognized artist, and achieved almost instant acceptance. We showed a classic harbor scene of Lever's among the Sunset series. Lever did an extensive amount of work in the city. This fairly small piece reflects his bold brushwork and strong colors, leading to his frequently being referred to as the American Van Gogh. As one witty critic observed, Lever was a brilliant painter, but he didn't have an ear for music. Junius Allen was born in and a lifelong resident of Summit, New Jersey. However, he was extremely active in all the art organizations in New York and excelled at capturing the grittier side of urban existence. Allen was hailed as one of New Jersey's most promising young artists, a committed realist, but with his own conservative use of Impressionism. His work is in several museums, including the Met, the Montclair, and the New Britain museums. This gutsy view of the East River employs a true working symbol of the waterways, the tugboat. Shrouded in smoke and fog, features like warehouses, docks, and heavy industrial crane in the background all contribute to a convincing urban scene. New York City had a magnetic attraction for many artists who resided elsewhere, but came to the city often for exhibitions, meetings at art organizations like the Salmagundi Club, and of course to paint. This small, rapidly executed study of the city's most recognizable icon, the Statue of Liberty. It's almost monochromatic. The statue itself is hidden within the dark clouds. The old lime artist who painted her is Bruce Crane, who we saw a few weeks back in the Sunset series. This is a personal statement by the artist and is inscribed to a friend and fellow artist, Sidney Shaw. This lush little work was likely executed around 1890. It's one thing to be a painter in New York. It's another to be a painter of New York. It's hard to grasp the breadth of Reginald Marsh's work. His 14th Street studio, overlooked Union Square, enabled him to scan the scene below and go out among the street hawkers, the tattoo parlors, the subway, and not far away, the Bowery with cheap bars and burlesque halls, and throngs of bodies enjoying Coney Island. He painted all of them. Marsh was also fascinated with the docks, longshoremen and tugs, and ocean liners. This scene is along the west side piers of the Hudson River, painted with loose, spontaneously applied watercolor. A close view demonstrates how facile he was with this medium. Notice the figure walking along the edge of the docks. Between his staggering number of illustrations for the Daily News and his prodigious output of easel paintings, it's estimated Marsh painted over 5,000 works of art. A critic's description of his work read, quote, "The human crowd in all its sweaty and tawdry aspects, indulging in vulgar yet exuberant social rituals." Now, that's a man after my own fantasies. One of the most prolific and successful Impressionists was the Connecticut artist Guy Wiggins. At age 20, he was the youngest American artist to have a work accepted into the permanent collection of the Metropolitan Museum. His early career tended to focus upon landscapes in and around the Old Lyme region. One of the better-known stories about artists alleges that Wiggins was in his New York studio preparing for an upcoming exhibition. It was snowing heavily, and while finishing a traditional landscape, he looked out his studio window and rather casually decided to paint a group of winter street scenes. When all these winter scenes were the first works to sell at his exhibition, he is said to have exclaimed, quote, "I am now a painter of New York City winter street scenes." And that is exactly what his reputation today is built on. This piece is entitled Out My Studio Window and is located right at the southern end of Central Park. The Plaza Hotel would be to the left, just outside the view. In Impressionist paintings, cars are not usually as accurately rendered as the examples seen here, making this kind of special. By the end of the century, urban life contrasted sharply with the pretty images of the Impressionists, lovely ladies, flower gardens, and tea parties. A group of younger artists, many working as artist journalists for newspapers, saw the seedy side of life. Their spiritual leader, Robert Henry, wanted art to be akin to journalism. He reacted against the genteel school. He preached painting should be as real as mud, as clods of horseshit on snow-frozen Broadway in winter. A random criticism of this growing approach appeared in a newspaper stating, quote, "Too many paintings of ash cans and girls hitching up their skirts." The term ash can stuck, and over time has encompassed many artists and subject matter of crowded streets and tenements, bars, drunks, and street urchins, usually in darker, more somber tones. It's usually not possible to paint a sweeping view of New York City. There's always too many buildings in the way. But Alfred Mira did exactly that. Starting with the West Side railways, he captured the West Side Highway, the docks, the Hudson River, and the Jersey skyline. To enhance the scene, there are cars on the highway, smoke and vessels in the piers, and river traffic. The rail yards seen here have been covered over by the Hudson Yards complex. The term site-specific applies to Mira. He usually identifies the specific location depicted in his paintings. Seen here is Herald Square in the early 1920s. Compare it with Mira's painting done in 1936. Definitely a second-generation artist of the city who was greatly influenced by the earlier Ashcan group, Mira spent some time in France, didn't like it, and returned to focus on New York and its street life. He had a few successful sellout exhibitions, but he struggled to make a living, and he used to sell rather mediocre paintings of Paris street scenes at the Greenwich Village sidewalk sales. He did this under a different, very French-sounding name, Paul Kuehne. I have seen Guyanese appear at auctions with impressive provenance, and I've had dealers fabricate complete drivel about this marvelous French artist. The strange part, they're actually starting to bring money. Alfred Mira has become highly sought after in the past couple of decades. Aside from his undeniable skill, he's greatly appreciated today for actually capturing the feel of the city. Night comes to the city, but it's painted far less often than the bright clarity of day. Yet here is one. The artist, Arthur C. Goodwin, I believe must have been stretching his imagination and experimenting when he painted this New York scene at dusk in pastel. It's an exploration of the color blue. It begs study to dissolve the subtle color changes into images of the streets, buildings, and gradually receding skyline. Goodwin is better known as an impressionist artist of Boston street scenes. The last decade of his life was spent in New York. I've always believed his best and most original works were in pastel. Again, the tones, mood, and sense of intimacy and introspection this piece generates places it somewhere between tonalism and impressionism. A positive side of urban life, socializing with friends and peers, is joyously portrayed by Arther Woelfle. This artist's bio indicated he received fairly standard instruction in Paris and from many of the highly regarded teachers in New York. He had a successful career as an artist and instructor, traveled widely, exhibited nationally, and earned a respectable number of prizes and awards. Arther Woelfle was a competent painter, but did not achieve the level of superstar, except for this piece, entitled The Grill Room Salmagundi Club. Founded in 1871 in New York, the Salmagundi Club is the oldest professional artists organization in the country. Its membership included many of the country's major artists. It also had the finest pool hall in Manhattan, with 15 tables, seen in the background of this painting. I spent many a night shooting pool there after work. This piece was painted in 1929, which was a rather tumultuous year. So, the happy faces seen here raises the question, was it likely painted before October 24th, the day of the stock market crash, or possibly afterwards with the help of a lot of alcohol? Each of the figures in the paintings is specific artist. On the back of the canvas is an outline of the composition. Each of the figures is numbered, and each of the artists signed a numbered list which is affixed to the stretcher. The viewer can identify each figure in the painting. The list of the painting's exhibition history is also on the reverse side. Things do change. This is the grill room of the Salmagundi Club today. And sadly, I don't believe the pool tables are still there anymore. Lest I'm accused of overlooking that smaller but still interesting city, Boston, and this turn-of-the-century image of the landmark Faneuil Hall, this major-sized work was painted in 1980 by a close friend, John Terelak. The image is an historical interpretation of Faneuil Hall area of Boston. I was on home leave from Germany and visited John's studio, and this piece was on his easel, half finished. I committed to it right there, convinced it would be a breakthrough work by the artist. Terelak worked his way through Vesper George Art School in Boston as a bouncer in a Hyde Park bar. He exhibited at galleries and major museum venues across the country and is passionate about his profession. Asked why he paints during an interview, John replied, "For all the reasons I can give you for painting, there's only one that will suffice. I love to paint. The emotions, smells, touches, successes, and the intangibles are all part of my love affair with art. Would that our urban areas looked this charming today." John entered this piece in an exhibition, and it was awarded a silver medal at the Rockport Art Association. Since my family and I were still living in Germany, this was a very special occasion. The medal was awarded in my father's name and was presented to John by my mother. Our next is Man at Work, Labor as Subject.